In this video, I'm going to be covering aircraft selection, different nations, the strengths and weaknesses of the aircrafts in different nations, battle ratings, and crew levels. So basically all the stuff that is important in determining before you enter an air arcade match. Now, one thing that I'm just going to mention at the start, um, thing that people need to understand is that the player is the most important part of determining a match. Okay, it doesn't matter what ideas he has in his mind when he's going into a game. It doesn't really matter uh, what are the aircraft that he has, like the tools, the weapons, that sort of stuff. Uh, if the player is good, and we don't measure his ability in terms of just skill, all right, it's more of like his competence is also equally important, and his attitude, right, his character, or what kind of mindset that he brings to the game. That always trumps everything else, right? Doesn't matter what kind of ideas he has in terms of like how he wants to conduct his dogfighting or his ground attack or the aircraft that he has in his lineup. The player is usually is the most determining factor on what wins games and engagements. With that out of the way, on to the topic of the video. So in Air Arcade, you get to bring more than one aircraft. You get respawns, and sometimes you actually get to bring the same aircraft twice if you have backups, and I'll talk about that later on in the video. But essentially, uh, one way of thinking about this is if people play these days trading card games or collectible card games that they've become more popular, like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering. This is basically like the deck that you're going to bring in the game. You get to select the different tools to have in your sort of like toolbox, and each tool is like a solution or an answer to a specific problem that you're going to encounter. So one thing to keep in mind, and I don't have hard evidence or like stats to back this one up. Uh, Me and my squadron mates, we did conduct a sort of like experiment. We kept tally of all the different mission types that we got in the game sessions that we were playing. And the number we came up was it's around 7 to 8 out of 10 air arcade matches are going to be ground strike or frontline. It's more skewed to ground attack than air to air missions. So when trying to create lineups that are helpful to winning, most of the aircraft that are going to be selected are going to be skewed or more specific to ground attack. Okay. Now, battle ratings is an important part of the game. This is a number that Gaijin assigns to each aircraft depending on the game mode. So in Air Arcade, it'll be different than realistic. So make sure that when you are looking up your aircraft at the bottom right of the tech tree, you either select it or it'll automatically uh, show you the BR ratings as what is determined by the matchmaker options that you have picked when you're clicking the to battle button. But battle ratings, it's a number that War Thunder has assigned to try to balance the game. All right, if you're flying a World War II kind of aircraft, you're not going to be engaged with aircraft with guided missiles and whatnot. Okay, they sort of try to keep it to the same era that it's supposed to be. So naturally, all of the rank 1 aircraft, they're going to be somewhere between BR 1 to 2. And then from rank 2 onwards, it's around usually scaled 1 BR up. So it'll be 2 to 3, 3 to 4. It's not an exact number because if you go over, let's say, here in Great Britain, you will find this aircraft right here, the Tempest Mark 5, the Vickers P. This is a rank 4 aircraft, but it's only at a battle rating of 3.3, which when compared to like other aircraft at this rank in the British tech line, you'll find as high as 6.0. So make sure you're looking up the correct game mode, what the different battle ratings are for all the different aircraft. Now, the way the matchmaker uses the battle rating, as I said, it was meant to keep the game balanced. But this game is anything but balanced, all right? If a lot of veteran players here are going to tell you that, yeah, that's how it's on paper, but in reality, that ain't how it works. So the way that War Thunder conducts the matchmaking is that if you're flying at a battle rating of, let's say, 2.7, what happens is when you go into a match, you are able to see aircraft that are either one battle rating higher or lower. So at 2.7, if you go into a match, you could very well be fighting against opponents with aircraft at 3.7. All right, that is a completely normal phenomenon, and it shouldn't be a thing because it basically is a bit unfair at that point. But that's just how the game is, and it does work the other way around. You could get into what we call a down tier match, where if you're flying 2.7, you might be the one on the other end, and your opponents might just have 1.7 aircraft. So that's a thing. Now in Air Arcade, what it does is that it takes the average of your lineup in terms of battle rating and assigns that to the matchmaker. So it's not averaging in the traditional mathematical sense. Gaijin has its own math. So for example, if I were to just bring this Hurricane Mark 1 right here uh, with no other aircraft in the lineup, what it would do is that the matchmaker would average it down a BR to 2.3. So it would consider me as a player with whatever aircraft that I have, in this case just this one, as a 2.3. So I would be able to see aircraft as low as 1.3 and only as high as 3.3. Now, the way that you can utilize this in your lineups is that if you have one aircraft at a BR that's higher than what you're aiming at. So for example, I've got a lineup here for 2.3. Now, I can have one aircraft at the BR that I want it to have. So in this example, at 2.3, I've got the Mark 2B Trop here at 2.3. I've got it at the BR that I want. I can have one aircraft that's a BR higher than that. So in this case, it'll be the Hurricane Mark 1 late at 2.7. And after that, I can stack the lineup with aircraft that is a BR lower than what I want. And well, I can have more than that basically. So I can have one higher than the BR that I want, one at the BR, and the rest below. And Gaijin will calculate this lineup here at 2.3. Now on to the different nations and the strengths and weaknesses of the aircraft in different nations. So the thing that you have to keep in mind, as we've discussed with battle rating, is that what the strengths and weaknesses of a nation at a certain battle rating are may not be the same as you progress down the tech tree. All right, that's something to keep in mind. So I'm just going to be discussing the 5 first nations that were added in the game, that were part of the game. I'm not going to be discussing China, Italy, France, Sweden, Israel, because they have smaller tech lines, because they're newer nations. They don't have as many aircraft, and quite frankly, they're not really competitive in Air Arcade. So I'll just be discussing the original 5, the US, Germany, Soviet Union, the UK, and Japan. Now, as a general rule of thumb, the way that the nations are ranked in terms of their competitive nature for Air Arcade, it's the Americans and Germans first, followed by the Soviets, and then the British and the Japanese in the third tier. You may find other players that have different opinions on that. This is mine, but it is if you do ask other people, this is the general ranking. So I'll start off with the British and Japanese, and I'll work my way up. And I haven't played much of the Japanese tech line, but it is similar to the British, which is why they are ranked at the third tier that I've stated. So with the Brits and the Japs, you have aircraft which you have a lot of good fighters, right? You've got a lot of planes that can climb well, turn well, and pretty fast. And in terms of armament, at the mid BR range, they do all right. At the lower tiers, they struggle a little bit, especially if you get up tiered, then you're going to have some problems. But for the most part, their fighters are great. Okay, which is why in Air Arcade, as I mentioned at the start of the video, most of the matches are geared towards ground attack, you see. So you're going to be struggling, especially at the middle BR ranges at, let's say, 4.0 or higher, maybe even 3.7 or higher. Because in both tech lines for the British and the Japanese, their ground attack aircraft are really lacking. All right. They do have strike aircraft and bombers, but we'll also have to talk about airframes and not just the weapons that they carry. It doesn't matter how many bombs you have, if your aircraft is extremely slow and vulnerable, you're not going to be able to get to the target to drop the bombs. So an example of a competitive lineup for the British, I've got one here. So this one here, 2.7. I've got my fighters on the right here, the last three, 2 Spitfires and a Hurricane. And over to the left, I've got all my ground attack aircraft. So the thing about British, especially if you're a British main, you have the option of using aircraft such as the Mach 4 Hurricane. So these are ground attack aircraft which do not utilize bombs, but they utilize heavy cannons. And there are quite a few of them in the British tech line. And you should be able to find one at every BR or so. So here at rank 2, at BR2, you have the Mach 4. After that, you have the Mosquito at BR3, the Mach 18. And in between, or after that, you have the Tempest Mach 5 at 3.3. And the Mach 5 here scales pretty well if you want to take it up to higher BRs because it's really fast. And it's a rank 4, that's why it's a rank 4 aircraft. It's, like I said before, the way Gaijin determines battle ratings and ranks, it's not even, it's not exact, it's all over the place really. But there are options such as these and in the British tech line. The Japanese, I don't think they have that kind of option really. You will have aircraft that have big cannons, but if we're talking specifically for ground attack, the British have quite a lot of those aircraft that are tailor-made for that. Now onto the Russians. And the reason why that I put the Russians second to the Americans and the Germans is that after you get to BR 3.0 or higher, their ground attack capability drops off significantly, all right? If we're talking reserve to 2.0 battle ratings, the Russians are actually, statistically speaking, the best. They have a lot of multi-engine aircraft, which are very large. They can absorb a lot of damage. They're not that particularly fast, but they have a lot of bombs. They can carry a lot of ordnance. And the thing about Air Arcade is that if you're playing at battle rating 2.0 or lower, the ground attack missions are different, right? They are usually populated with just light targets, which means if you're bringing a lot of bombs, and Russian bombs, they have quite a few large ones. They measure them in kilograms, not pounds. So in this case here, for the Su-2 TSS-1, you can bring these 6 100-kilogram bombs, and if you're at the BR of 2.0 or lower, you're only going to be facing lots of light targets, and they're usually grouped up together close. So this added with the reload time of a strike aircraft, which it is designated, you can get a lot of ground kills, and you can bleed tickets real fast in a ground strike or frontline type mission. So this is why the Russians I put at just the second to the Americans and Germans, because after you get to 2.0 and you start engaging hard targets such as tanks and pillboxes at BRs 3.0 or higher, you're gonna start struggling because their aircraft now are facing up against opponents with cannons and heavier machine guns, and their slow speed and maneuverability then is not much of is a detriment to them. Basically, they get shot down much easier. In terms of fighters all the way from no matter what BR, they do well. Yeah, they can turn. Once you get to like 5.0 or higher, you get some that can energy fight, but yeah. Now on to the Americans and Germans. So I don't play that much Germans, but the tech lines in terms of like aircraft, they are sort of similar. You'll have quite a lot of good selection in terms of fighters and ground attack aircraft, and they usually scale very well as you progress down the BR lines. For example, here in the Germans, the Ju-88 here, this is really good, right? I knew a guy that would take the A4 version here, and he would take it up as far as BR 6.0. And I saw him do this many times, and he could get it to work. He can get double-digit ground, no problem, with the 88A4 here, as high as 6.0. And in the US tech line, which I'm going to be discussing the most because it's what I use mainly for Air Arcade, it's my now main nation because I can get it to work a lot better than the British tech line. So with the Germans, you also get aircraft with cannons, ground attack cannons, like this one here, the Ju-87 G2. It's got the 237 mil cannons. So strike aircraft like this also exists in the Germans. I think they have another one later down. The Duck here, the HS-129. That's a ground attack aircraft centered around a big cannon, basically. So they have a lot of variety and they scale well. They do pretty well. As they later on, they become faster, so they can keep up with enemy fighters. The German fighters, they all do quite well. 109s can't go wrong. They are good all-round fighter aircraft. The later ones, especially at 4.0 or higher, they can dogfight pretty well. Some of them can keep up with Spitfires. So yeah. Now for the Americans, which is my favorite. So you can't go wrong at any BR with the Americans, really. The only part where they will struggle is around the 1.0 to 2.0 BR line. Here, their ground attack capabilities are pretty limited. But after you get that, after you pass that, they pretty much dominate. All right, they've got good aircraft, they can survive well, they fly fast, and they carry a lot of bombs. And as for their fighters, they're not as maneuverable as the other nations, such as the Brits or the Japanese, but they are more sturdier. And in my previous video talking about aerial gunnery, they have a lot of 50 caliber machine guns. So killing power for the Americans, no problem. So I'm going to go in depth into two lineups that I have for the Americans, the 2.7 BR lineup and a 4.0 BR lineup. And I'll walk you through the rationale of my aircraft selection and how it works out. And you can apply this to any nation and any BR. So starting off with the ground attack aircraft, the main work horsepower for my 2.7 lineup here is going to be these three aircraft here: the B-34, the A-20, and the A-36. All strike aircraft. They all have the secondary reload bonus. The B-34 and the A-20, despite being twin-engine bombers, they are actually really fast, and the B-34 especially is very maneuverable. I've been able to get into some dogfights and win them with this in single-engine aircraft, and it works out real well. The added benefit is the rear gun turrets for the B-34 and the A-20, they have 50 cals. So for the B-34, it has two. The one below is only 30 caliber, but the one on top, it's got like a 360-degree angle. It can actually shoot forward. I've gotten air kills in the forward quarter with this turret up here because it's not obstructed by the game doesn't model these radar antenna things here. It can shoot forward straight. So very deadly, packs quite a lot of punch. Now for the fighters, thing about American aircraft, and especially if you get to the BR just slightly above this, that 3.0, American fighters, they can do ground attack pretty well as well, despite the fact that they don't have the secondary reload timer, because a lot of their aircraft can carry bombs. Now, they may not have a lot of them, and it may not bring very big ones, but the ability to just have that option, I found very, very helpful in air arcade matches. So, for example, this P-40 here, usually I'll bring it in for air kills, but if I've already run out of my strike aircraft, I can bring this in. It's got the 650, so I can take out light ground units very easily. And for the slightly harder targets like pillboxes and tanks, I've got 3 bombs as an option. Now, in terms of like main interceptor fighters, for me, the P-38s, they do really well. You can turn fight with them, but if you know how to use them correctly, and I'll get more in depth in my dogfighting video about the different types of air combat maneuvers and tactics. For me, the P-38s, I can get them to work really well. Other people may not be able to, and they may prefer to have turn fighters, such as the Wildcat here. This turns really well. It can dogfight really well. It's not as fast. It's kind of slow. But if you're in a air domination, and sometimes if you're in an airfield domination match where you have to defend an airfield, you're not too concerned about being that fast. You're more concerned about getting kills and making sure people don't land on the airfield. So fighters, it does take a little bit of getting used to, especially if you've switched over from another nation, such as the British or the Japanese. You get used to the slightly slower turning times, but the increased benefit of killing power. So to recap, I've got the main strike capabilities in these 3 aircraft, the B-34, A-20, A-36. The fighters are a mix. For the air-to-air capabilities, it's centered around my 2 P-38s, and the rest of the aircraft are just filler for the most part. They can do both, either help out with ground attack if I've used up my strike aircraft, or help out with air killing if we run into an airfield domination or air domination match. Now for my 4.0 lineup, it's still the same principles. I've got my designated strike aircraft, but in this case, my first aircraft that I bring out is not a strike aircraft. It's actually designated as a fighter. Here it's called an air defense fighter, but it doesn't matter. It's got an orange diamond. It doesn't get the secondary reload times. But the thing about this P-61 here, right? It's got 4 1,000-pound bombs, so lots of bombing power. The reload time is long, so you only get this 1 bomb drop off. But you have 4 of these 20mm AN-M2 cannons, which are high velocity, and you can kill tanks with these. All right. So on paper, it should be terrible for what it is that you're trying to achieve. But at the end of the day, War Thunder is a game. And we are playing Air Arcade, which is a different game mode compared to realistic or simulator. And the P-61 here absolutely dominates at 4.0 for anything really, even for air-to-air stuff, because this gun turret here, if you get your cruise maxed out, this gun turret is 360. And I've also gotten, like in the B-34 that I mentioned just now for the 2.7 lineup, you can get air kills in front. And sometimes the gunner is more accurate than me. So all around good package. It's really fast. It can take a lot of hits. Yeah. just a good aircraft. Now, as I mentioned before about my friend who flew Germany as his main, he used to bring the Ju-88s into higher BRs than it should have been able to perform at. Same here for the A20 and the B-34 at 4.0, they still work really well. They are still pretty fast. They can keep up here and there. They are still very maneuverable, and because they're strike aircraft with their bomb loadouts, I can still get a lot of ground units killed with them. They still work really well. Now, following on the line of logic with the P-61, the P-47s, even though they are not designated strike aircraft, uh, with the 3 bombs, and you get 3 pretty large bombs, the 850 cals, and the ability to bring rockets along with all that, all around, really fast aircraft. It can take a lot of hits, and even though you're going to be able to get maybe 1 or 2 bomb drops, attack runs in, that's more than enough. I'm able to get double digits with P-47s in just 1 attack run with this loadout, and that's usually more than enough to win the game, to bleed enough tickets, because you're coupling in that with the P-61, the A20, and the B-34. And I've got 2 P-47s in this lineup, the D-28 and the D-25. Not much difference. One is slightly faster than the other, but in terms of loadout, survivability, maneuverability, speed, it's about the same. Now for my fighter aircraft, I still bring 2 P-38s, the P-38G and the P-38J, but the main air-to-air capabilities now have shifted over to the P-51s and the Corsair 1D. I find that at this higher BR, turn rate is more important than energy retention or speed, especially for air domination or airfield domination matches. The ability to go over an airfield and then hold the airfield against enemy captures, you're going to need the maneuverability more than the speed. So the P-51s, they work out really well at that, and the Corsairs as well. Now on to crew slots and crew levels. So for new players, when you start out, you'll only be able to get up to 5 crew slots before you hit the Golden Eagle wall. Now, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's still the same as it was when I started playing. Gaijin will give you some gold at the start when you create a new account, and you should have enough to get, I think, 1, maybe even a second crew slot to make it up to 7. But let's just say that's not an option for you. Working with just 5 crew slots, now you're going to have to economize. And I recommend that you always bring 3 ground attack aircraft and 2 fighters of some sort. All right. Reason why is the same as I mentioned earlier. Most of the air arcade matches are going to be skewed to ground attack rather than air-to-air type missions. And if you are still just running 5 crew slots, once you get your hands on some backups, I recommend you put that on your fighters, because if you get into an air domination or an airfield domination match, it becomes a game of attrition at that point. Who can shoot down as many aircraft and who's the last man standing in the cap zone, basically. So those are the tips to keep in mind if you're a new player. Now, the crew levels. So each crew slot, right? They gain proficiency with the aircraft that you have put in. All right. So, for example, here in my first crew slot on the far left for the P-61, if I were to take the P-61 out of here and put it into another one of the crew slots, they don't get the same proficiency levels as they do for the first one. All right. If you go into the crew tab, if you right click on the aircraft, you come up to this window. And if you go over to qualifications, so here you'll have the option of buying special qualification courses for the aircraft for that crew. All right. So let me see if I can demonstrate here. If I take the P61 out of here, let's say put it here. If I go into the crew tab, now you can see that it's instead of being maxed out as it was in the first crew slot, it's all much lower. I don't have the qualification for expert. I don't have the ace qualification either. Some of these stat lines are not maxed out or empty. That's how it is. It depends. It does matter which crew slot that you assign the aircraft to, and it's important that if you are progressing down the BR line, if you are gonna have to make new lineups for different BRs, it would be better if you still had the qualifications on an aircraft that you're still using. For example, the A20 here, I've got this at 2.7 and at 4.0, and I've got it in the same crew slot for both BR lines because I didn't want to take the time to regrind the crew levels and the qualification levels in another crew slot. I have done that for some aircraft, like the B34 here. It's in a different crew slot. That took quite a lot of time to grind out for both two different crew slots. So for new players, you want to try plan out how your lineup's going to look like and which aircraft are being assigned to which crew slots. Now let's go in depth into each of the individual skills and each of the different tabs in the crew tab. So here, the first one, you have the pilot crew skills, okay? And you've got 5, keen vision, awareness, G tolerance, stamina, and vitality. Now in Air Arcade, keen vision and awareness, these aren't really important. These help out a lot more in realistic. So basically, this helps with the detection range of the markers on enemy units that pop up. And in Arcade, well, technically nobody really knows what the algorithms are that Gaijin has in War Thunder, but they aren't that important. All right, what you want to focus on are these 3 here: G tolerance, stamina, vitality. So G tolerance, very important for your fighters, because if you're pulling Gs, you don't want to black out or red out and lose vision or control of your aircraft when you're in a dogfight. That's really bad. Stamina here allows you to sustain the Gs that you pull for longer. So for sustained dogfights, this is important. Vitality helps against your pilot being sniped. So normally, if you don't have this leveled out, it takes very little for enemies to kill your pilot and you lose your aircraft. If the more levels that you put into vitality, the more it takes for enemies to kill you. And usually this helps out with like lucky shots more often than not, because not many people are really that good of a shot to go straight for just your pilot. All right, so this one does help a lot in Air Arcade. Now for defensive armament, this is only important if your aircraft has gunners, all right? This stuff here, it doesn't affect the pilot. There's been some confusion. People, new players, when they log in the game and they find this tab, they seem to think sometimes that this helps with shooting your forward guns that are player control. That's not how it works. This only affects the gunners if you have a multi-crew, multi-engine aircraft. So the number of experienced gunners, you will have to get this up depending on how many gunners are on the aircraft that you have selected. If you just hover over there, it will tell you the parameters in the stat card here, how many gunners you have and how many you can have trained up to the proficiency. If you have it lower than the number of gunners that you have, then they won't get the full bonuses of all the rest of these stats that you will have upgraded. Okay, so fire accuracy and fire precision, it's about the spread and the time that it takes for the turret to engage targets. All right, that's what these two are for. G tolerance, if you're pulling Gs, if your pilot sort of like blacks out, usually what happens is that you lose control of the aircraft. The same for gunners, if you're pulling a lot of Gs and they're not maxed out or not upgraded on the G tolerance here, then they won't be able to engage targets until they level out and stop pulling Gs. Same for stamina. And for vitality, the same as the pilot. Takes more shots to kill the gunners if you have it leveled out. And this is just as important as the pilot if you are flying aircraft with gunners. This way, the more survivable your gunners are, the longer that they're going to be able to be alive to shoot down enemy aircraft that are behind you. Now for logistical services, the repair rank here, I'm not entirely sure how it works, and quite frankly, I haven't run into any problems with what it says here about the maximum rank that the mechanic can repair. It doesn't really matter if you do end up having problems. If you ever just come back to this tab and then hover over, there'll probably be like a help tooltip that will pop up telling you what is and is not working out for this crew level here. But reload speed is one of the most important for the logistical services. Repair speed, it helps if you're in an airfield domination match sometimes, but it's very, very rare for you to be so damaged that you manage to actually land on a friendly airfield, not get shut up in the meantime that you're repairing, and then take off and get back into the game in time to affect the game. All right, it's not that important. Reload speed, on the other hand, especially for fighters, and if you're for using strike aircraft and bombers, the reload speed also helps with the secondary reload time. So, for example, on a strike aircraft, if you get this one maxed out, you can get your bombs back in 30 seconds. That is really, really helpful. Weapon maintenance, I haven't found this to be that helpful. It's not that important to go in all the way. Back in the day when I was still flying the British and I was dependent on the rockets and the heavy cannons a lot, this helped out a lot because this helps with the scattering of your weapons, basically. Now for the qualification tab, what you get access here to is the ability to buy qualifications, and there are two types. There's the expert qualification, which you can buy with the Silver Lions, and the ace qualification, which you can buy with Golden Eagles. But what you can also do is that if you just buy the expert qualification and then just play the aircraft, all the experience that you get on the aircraft accumulates. And if you ever come back to this tab, you'll be able to hover over it and you'll see here there's a bar of progression. And on that bar, if you accumulate enough experience points, you get the ace qualification for free. Yeah, that's a helpful thing. It does take quite some time, and the number, the amount of experience needed to get the ace qualification depends on the aircraft. So, right, so different aircraft of different ranks, they require different amounts. Okay, but in order to get that, you first have to buy the expert qualification. And the thing about the expert qualification is that you will need a certain amount of crew level prior to it in order to buy it, right? And the crew level is calculated here at the top. It's taken into account all three tabs of the different crew levels for pilot, defensive armament, and the logistical services. It counts it all. If you want to find out what the minimum amount is in order to buy the expert qualification, you just come back to this tab and it will tell you. If you just hover over it, it'll tell you in this pop-up card here how high a level you need. Now there is a tool that you can use. It's called a backup. If you go to your aircraft that you have selected, right click and go to modifications, you have this option here of a backup vehicle. And backup vehicles in Air Arcade, what they let you do is essentially bring an aircraft twice into a game. So let's say I bring the P-61 into a game, I go in, conduct ground attack, and then get shot down. If I really need to use the P-61 again, I can activate the backup and just take it into the game again. If I get shot down a second time in that, then I won't be able to bring the P-61 again in for that match. Right? So this is what the backup vehicles let you do. And they're really helpful, especially if you're in a air domination or airfield domination. If you're limited on crew slots, if you put these on your fighters, it's a game of attrition, as I've said. You can bring it twice. So basically, instead of having just 2 aircraft in a 5 aircraft lineup, 2 fighters, you now technically have 4. All right, you've now doubled if you have the backup on both. And for ground strike missions, sometimes because they usually go by very fast, they don't ground strike missions don't last that long. And if we're up against a enemy team that's also trying to win, sometimes I will burn the backup on whatever strike aircraft I usually take out first. Is usually either the P-61, the A-20, or the B-34. I take that out a second time and try to get the game over as fast as possible. So that wraps it up for this video. Thanks for watching. If anybody's got any questions, or if I wasn't clear on some things, you can ask questions in the comments below, and I'll try to get around to answering them. Thanks.